Hi, welcome back to my conservation studio. If plaster adjacent areas are still in good condition, walls should be pounded just slightly with a small trowel or pry bar to work behind the plaster carefully in order to pry any loose pieces off the wall. So we want to make sure the totally surrounding area is well adhered with keys. When the damaged plaster has been removed, the owner must decide whether to replaster over the existing lath or use a different type of system. The decision should be based on part of the thickness of the original plaster and the condition of the original lath, and the history of the house. Remember, this is all about the object. Economy and time are also considerations. It is important to ensure that the wood trim around the windows and doors will have the same reveal as before. The reveal is the projection from the wood trim from the surface of the plastered wall. Replastering. Alternative lath systems for new plaster, replastering old wood lath. When plasters work with old lath, each lath strip is renailed at the chunks of the old plaster are cleared out. Because the old lath is dry, it must be thoroughly soaked before the base coat of plaster or it will warp and buckle. Furthermore, because the water is drawn out, the plaster will fail to set properly. As noted earlier, as the base coat for the new plaster, many of these problems can be avoided and the historic lath can be retained. The ceiling should be sprayed unless the vapor barrier is placed behind the metal lath. Replastering over the old metal lath. An alternative to reusing the old wood lath is to install a different lathing system. Galvanized metal lath is the most expensive, but also the most reliable in terms of longevity, stability, and proper keying. When lathing over open joists, the plaster should cover the joists with craft paper and a polyethylene vapor barrier. 3 coats of wet plaster system, as we described, are used and applied consecutively to form a solid monolithic unit with the lath. The scratch coat keys into the metal lath. The second or brown coat bonds to the scratch coat and builds the thickness. The third or finish coat consists of lime putty with and/or gauging plaster. Replastering over new rock lath. It is also possible to use rock lath as opposed to a plaster base. Plasters may need to remove the existing wood lath to retain the woodwork's reveal. Rock lath is 16 by 36 inches, half-inch thick gypsum core panel covered with absorbent paper and gypsum crystals in the paper. The crystals in the paper bond the wet plaster and anchor it securely. This type of lath requires 2 coats of new plaster, the brown coat and the finish coat. The gypsum lath itself takes the place of the first or scratch coat of plaster. Let's talk about plastering materials. Plasters generally mix ready-use base coat plaster today for plastering, especially where large holes are needed to be filled. The ready mix plaster contains gypsum and aggregate in proper proportions. The plaster only needs to add water and vigorously and properly mix the substance. Another mix plaster is used to patch cracks or small holes, or for finish coat repair is a high gauge lime putty, which is 50% lime and 50% gauging plaster. This material will produce a white, smooth patch. It is especially suitable for surface repairs. Although property owners cannot duplicate the years of accumulated knowledge and craft skills of a professional plasterer, there are materials that can be used for do-it-yourselfers. For example, fine cracks can be filled with an all-purpose joint compound. For bridging larger cracks using fiberglass tape, a homeowner can use a quick-setting joint compound. This compound has a fast drying time of 60, 90, and or 120 minutes. quick-setting joint compound dries because of a chemical reaction, not because of water evaporation. It shrinks less than all-purpose joint compound and has much of the same workability as base coat plaster. Remember, these fixes are not for historical homes, stressed. However, because the quick-set joint compounds are hard to sand, they should be only used to bed tape or fill large holes. All-purpose joint compound should be used as a final coat to sanding. Homeowners may see a material solid as patching plaster or plaster Paris in hardware stores. This dry plaster cannot be used by itself for plaster repairs. It must be combined with lime to create a successful patching mixture. When using a lime finish coat for any repair, wait longer to paint or to use alkaline-resistant primer. Plaster terms. So we're going to use some plaster definitions for those homeowners who would like to use the 3-plaster system, or for budding professionals. Scratch coat, the first base coat put on the wood or metal lath. The wet plaster is scratched with a scratchifier or comb to provide a rough surface so the next layer of base coat will stick to it. Next, a brown coat, the second application of wet base coat plaster with wood lath or metal systems. With gypsum lath, it is the only base coat needed. Finish coat, pure lime mixed about 35% gauging plaster to help it to harden. It is used for very thin surface finishes or skim coats of the plastering of a wall. Fine sand can be added for a sanded finish coat also. Casing bead. Early casing beads was made of wood. In the late 19th century, metal casting beads were sometimes used around metal fireplace projections and door and window openings. Like a wood ground, they indicate the proper thickness of the plaster, so it's a great help to the plaster. A ground. Plasters use metal or wood strips around the edges of doors and windows at the bottom of the walls. These grounds can help keep the plaster in the same thickness and to provide a stopping edge for the plaster. Early plaster work, however, did not use grounds. Only early buildings, 1710 and on, the woodwork was installed and primed before plastering began. Sometime in the early 19th century, a transformation occurred and plasters applied their wall finish before woodwork was installed. Gypsum, once mined from large gypsum quarries near Paris, France, thus the name plaster of Paris. Gypsum is a natural form of calcium sulfate. When calcified or heated, 1.5 water molecules are driven off, leaving a hemihydrate of calcium sulfate. While gypsum was used in houseboat coat plaster from lime putty, it caused the lime to harden sufficiently. Gypsum is also an ingredient in molding plaster, a finer plaster used to decorate moldings in ornamental plasterwork. Lime. Found in limestone formations or shell mounds, naturally occurring lime is calcium carbonate, which when heated it becomes calcium oxide. After water has been added, it becomes calcium hydroxide. This calcium hydroxide reacts with carbon dioxide in the air to react and recreate the original calcium carbonate. Screed. Screed are strips of plaster run horizontally or vertically on walls or ceilings. They're used to plumb or straighten uneven walls or level ceilings. Metal screeds are used to separate different types of plaster finishes or to separate lime and cement plasters.